Hey guys, this is Beltran, and today on my channel I have an extremely special guest. He's quite well known. He makes the rounds in the transgender community, but not for what they would deem as the right reasons. I have Walt Heyer on the program. Thank you so much for coming, Walt. I really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I was just in Australia in July.
Oh, I wish I had known. That would have been fun to have met up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you want to sort of give your own little brief history in case there are people out there who aren't aware of what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, well, I've lived the trans life for 8 years. I started out as a young 4-year-old cross-dressing kid, and so it went on to the point to where I was approved for surgery, underwent gender reassignment surgery, and lived the life for 8 years, and then started studying psychology and realized that the surgery really doesn't address the issues that cause people to want to change genders, that there's much things that are deeper and more significant that taking hormones and doing surgery really won't address properly. So I have a website that I built, sexchangeregret.com, and we've had as many as 350,000 views of the website in 1 year. And so there's a lot of people out there that are hurting, that need a place to go, and I'm there for them, and I help them find their way back. With the term is detransition, but I only work with people who have regret. That's plenty of work to do, and I get those people come to my attention every day via email. So there's plenty of people out there that are hurting, that need somebody to kind of guide them through the detransition process.
Mm. Well, I became aware of you just because the subject of transgenderism was one that started to fascinate me about 2 years ago. I came across stories like Caroline Cossey and that sort of thing. So, in your particular case, you were encouraged by a loved one, your grandmother,
Mhm.
to transition, or at least you sort of had that little secret. So I would say that that kind of planted the seed in you specifically. But in the case of
Mhm.
many other kids out there, that's not what's happening. In fact, they're not getting that support from a loved one. Their parents are trying to stop them, but the kid persists. What do you peg that to? Because that's quite sad. That's quite
Well,
disturbing.
actually, from what you may be talking to a different group of people than I am, because what I'm seeing actually is that they do get support from family members and
I'm
loved
not talking
ones.
about those people though. I'm talking about the ones that don't. So I'm well aware of what you're saying, and I was going to touch on that as well.
Yeah, the ones who don't are the ones that I have found that have deep psychological, emotional, or sexual dysfunction problems. Many of them are people who are suffering from autogynephilia or a transvestic fetish or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or dissociative disorder
So
or
you think it's a
narcissism.
misdiagnosed illness that's yet to
I,
be named the right thing?
I think what happens is they get diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and the dysphoria is there. I'm not saying that dysphoria is not there. And,
Mm-mm.
and I agree that dysphoria by itself is not a mental disorder. But what's missing in the equation is the diagnosis of the comorbid disorders, that is, the other underlying disorders that are causing them to feel the way they feel. And so, if they properly diagnose them, they will find out that they have maybe Asperger's, which is one of the things that some people who identify as transgender have, or they have a dissociative disorder, or maybe body dysmorphia. There's
Yeah,
something else going on
yeah.
that just identifying them as a transgender is not a complete diagnosis. It's only a partial diagnosis.
Mm. I would agree, just because simply the fact that doctors seem so quick to say gender dysphoria, get a sex change. And I in my opinion, what would be better is if it was made as difficult as possible to be transgendered, because I'm sure that there are some, and you may disagree with the following statement, I'm sure there are some where when they live that way, it is fulfilling and it is right for them. Caroline Cossey is a good example, but the difference between Caroline Cossey and the majority of the public or the majority of the general public today that claim to be transgendered is that she had Klinefelter syndrome, so she was medically mosaic. And I believe that if you are in that category of someone who has extra chromosomes, you probably have a better argument than most for sex change. Whereas most people, it seems to be something that is merely mental. It's a mental state. Whereas if your chromosomes or your brainwaves are a little bit different, then that would be, in my opinion, the only time that I would consider, not that I'm anyone who deserves to have a standard or anything, but that would be the only time I would consider transitioning to be justifiable. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there are, like Klinefelter's is certainly one of those issues that doesn't fall into the purview of actually being a transgender. And that's one of the things, we're using the wrong terms. That's a Klinefelter syndrome is a Klinefelter syndrome. That's not a transgender. So if you have someone, I have yet to see any objective proof that anyone has any brain waves that are different, gender different. What they have shown in the studies of the brain is that people who've been taking hormones for many years and then died, and they did post-mortem on a cadaver, they found that their brain changed, but that was because of the ingesting hormones for 10 or 15 years.
Yes, which completely changes one's psyche somewhat, right?
But they weren't born that way. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. So what about the ones who claim that they are born that way? Baby, I was born this way.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the tragic thing, that when doctors tell them that they were, to affirm them, because this is where I think it goes off the rails. There are very few people will tell people the truth. And the truth is, you cannot change biologically from one gender to the other. Now, if you want to play this masquerade game of being a different gender, just tell them this is a masquerade. You're not going to change biologically who you are. And if you want to socially transgender, live as a transgender, just understand you're really not a female if you're a guy, or a male if you're a girl. So that's important, I think, to tell the truth. But today, no one wants to speak the truth, and
because facts are offensive.
yeah, and they are. But golly, wouldn't it be nice if we started telling the truth and just lived out the truth? I think we'd see a whole lot fewer suicides than we have. I think the people that write me, I'm working right now with an individual I have on my computer over there, who was rushed into surgery, and him and 15 other people are now having deep regret and want help. And it's just one doctor, one surgeon, who's promoted this as the fix all to every problem they have. And they all now, just in this year, 16 of them have joined together, and they want to hurt the doctor because it's total nonsense.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you. I believe, and many should believe the same thing, that you cannot change your gender. It's everything with language. They use the phrase gender confirmation surgery. That's the phrase that's now being uttered, where it's actually gender. It's not even gender reassignment. I would say it's just a sex change, or I don't even know what the right word is, but the more accurate word would be sex change. But I had actually a transgendered lady on my channel. Her name is Melissa Carley. She was a Klinefelter's syndrome person who decided that rather than being male, she'd rather live as female because of the chromosomal makeup. And she said that, or I basically said to her, listen, if you were to die and we were to look at your bones, genetically speaking, your pelvic bone would indicate to anyone looking that you are male. Can you acknowledge that? She goes, yeah. She goes, that's true. I know. She goes, I'm not a woman. I am a trans woman. She goes, this is what people need to realize. Everything else is a simulation. Would you agree with all of that?
I would just disagree with the terminology. That I would prefer to be accurate and say this is a Kleinfelder transition, and that they have this mixture of chromosomes, and they're really not. I think it's kind of a shame that we've used the term umbrella term transgender to cover everything from,
Yeah.
as an example, a drag queen is not a transgender. They're primarily
No.
homosexual, flamboyant people who get out, and they oftentimes never have bottom surgery. They're just flamboyant homosexual men who like to dress. They're not
Mm.
transgender, but they identify as transgender. I think it puts a black mark on the transgender community by them doing that. And I think the people who are just plain old hidden cross dressers that go hide in their room and cross dress and enjoy cross dressing, they're not transgender, they're cross dressers. And the people
Yeah.
who have autogynephilia, which is a sexual fetish where they actually fall in love with the image of themselves cross dressed in the mirror and
Mm.
become sexually aroused by that, they're not transgender either. And neither is a transvestic fetish a transgender. So I think we've completely gone off the rails in how we have used this umbrella term transgender for people who actually aren't transgender at all. There are a whole bunch of other things.
It's a part of a cultural movement, perhaps, where the left has taken control of language, and due to that, they've created this whole minority victim complex. And if you're trans, it's trendy. And yeah, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
this is in its political power, it's political clout. When they get the larger, the the more people they put under the umbrella, the more people they have that they can say they support. But if you begin to actually be truthful, which we talked about at the start of this, is that it would hurt them to understand that uh, the drag queens are not transgender, the autogynephilia is not transgender. You could break the community down where, the Kleinfelder syndrome people are not transgender. They're just identifying, and they even use the word, I identify as a transgender. They are not.
That's true.
Just because you identify as a transgender, I'm sorry, does not make you a transgender.
Yeah, well, I identify as Chinese, so
Yeah. Well, I'm a black Japanese, so
you just beat me. That's what happened. That's what happened with Serena Williams. That black Japanese lady was like, just let her win. It's fine. I don't mind. Like, it's kind of
mm.
what happened.
Well,
So
and I'm only 29 years old too, because we got this guy in Belgium or whatever says he wants to take 20 years off his life.
yeah. Do you also
And so,
identify as rich?
yes, rich, and I'd like to take 50 years off my life. My bank account doesn't seem to change, but I'd like to be rich.
Yes, same.
It's all kind of nonsense when you break it down and start talking. It is laughable.
It's laughable, but they don't realize the stupidity, or they do, but they don't care because they know that there are many who sympathize with their plight, and so they persist with their delusions.
Yeah, well, I'm not buying into it. I've been there, done that, and it's a whole load of baloney.
Well, tell us a little bit about Laura. You lived as Laura for was it Laura or Lauren?
Laura.
Laura. So you lived as Laura for 8 years, and you
Mm-hmm.
said you felt the high of the moment. Like you did feel, oh my God, this is fantastic. But then towards the end of it, you became disillusioned by it. What woke you up, do you think?
Well, when I started studying psychology in California at the University of Santa Cruz,
Mm,
and I was starting to study in psychology and addictions and behavior and so forth. So it was an extensive study into psychology, and I began to crack open the old books, and you could see that from the books that many of the people who struggle with gender identity issues are also struggling with these underlying disorders. And the first one I saw was called separation anxiety. And I thought, what the world is that? I've never heard of that before.
mhm,
And so it was a young boy who was very close to his mother, very attached to his mother, and his mother passed away. And as
mm.
a way for him to not feel the pain of her passing away, he actually took on her female identity to feel close to her. And that's
Wow.
cool. And so that person would be identified as a transgender today, but the fact of the matter is that individual is suffering from separation anxiety. So there's, if we dig deep and begin to look under these issues and go deep, which actually the transgender community, that the advocates do not want you to look deep into the psychology of
No,
this.
they don't. It's a hidden world.
The reason is because it would totally fracture their message into so many pieces, they would actually have nothing left to talk about.
It'd be debunked very quickly.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah. Well, so that woke you up. I've actually done research. I did a whole video on the transgender uh, issues. I've done several, but I kind of came to a conclusion of my own that body dysmorphic disorder could be also what they actually have. There's a woman out there who made herself blind for the desire of wanting to be blind. So, there are amputees, people who amputate their arms for the sake of wanting, oh, I don't think I want my left hand. So
Yeah.
it's a very similar mentality to saying, well, I want to be a male even though I'm female. But the world doesn't see it that way because they're now also conditioned by this leftist rhetoric that they've become somewhat indoctrinated, that people like Ben Shapiro are threatened to be thrown into an ambulance simply because they say the facts. They state the facts like yourself.
Yeah. And I wrote a book about that. Just came out just a couple of weeks ago. It's called Trans Life Survivors. It's actually available in Australia through the
Yes,
bookstore.
I'll put a link to it in the description box below.
And so this has those stories like you're talking about in it, and the people tell their own stories. So there's so many different levels, and the one you talk about, body dysmorphia, is certainly in the mix and part of the problem. But also there are boys who are sexually molested early in life who just don't want their genitalia because it was their genitalia that caused them to be sexually abused. So in their mind, they think if it's gone and they remove it, they'll never be sexually molested again. So
Like an
you have
hammock.
yes. So you have all these different elements that we're, only people like yourself and myself are willing to explore and talk about what's really going on with these unfortunate situations. And I feel bad for them. I don't hate them.
Yeah.
I feel for them, and that's why I'm trying to bring the truth to it.
Well, this is part of why I stopped being a libertarian, because I used to think, oh, I'm a conservative libertarian. But I don't think I am a libertarian, because to be a libertarian means you're fine with what people do to themselves as long as it doesn't affect you. Now, this doesn't affect me, but it does hurt me, like in the context of, I don't know, Christian love or whatever words you want to spin on it. But I don't want people wrongly diagnosed and then regretting not having their parts. That really, like, that just, I don't know, I can't imagine it. And I feel like doctors are there to have a duty of care to people, but if they're just throwing the words transgendered, you're transgendered, well, that's not really a duty of care. You're actually hurting them more in the long run. There is a woman I forgot her name, in America who is one of the most sought after doctors for children who transgender. I'm not a fan of hers at all, and there's no duty of care there. Like, these people should be sued. These people should be in prison. Um,
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, especially with young children should not be subject of hormone blockers. And
Absolutely,
that is just so, it's child abuse. It's pure unadulterated child abuse.
it is.
And the doctors should not be allowed to practice that kind of medicine. If they find out the individual has some kind of issue when they're 18 to 24 years old, that's a different game. But when they're
Absolutely.
4, 5, 6, that the same age I was when I got indoctrinated and issued into this nonsense that really destroyed my life, and it
I know.
destroyed many lives. I'm just fortunate that I found my restoration and recovery through the Lord Jesus Christ.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. I just wanted to say that do in terms of what doctors do with adults, don't you think that it should be made as difficult as possible, that they should live as a female for maybe 3 years, they should have maybe psychology? Like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be able to transition, in case the people out there who want to call me a transphobe, I don't mind. Just it has to be so sure where they don't regret it anymore. Because if it's as clear as day to them, then I'd say go for it. But um, there are so many who are committing suicide, even as their dream, as playing the role of the female, and it's still not giving them what they want. Don't you think, even as adults, that they should be careful?
Oh, not only should they not be careful, they should not be doing surgery on many of these individuals
Yeah,
because what we do know is actual fact. Yes, fact is offensive, but the fact of the matter is 90% of the people who attempt or commit suicide are suffering from untreated psychological, emotional, and sexual disorders. It's not because society doesn't accept them. It's
mm,
because the doctors aren't treating the disorders that are causing them to feel that way. So I'm all
comorbidities.
for I'm all for people getting the surgery if in fact they've had a thorough, deep psychological evaluation and there are no comorbidities that exist in the person.
I'm inclined to agree.